When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, the description on one wire service, master criminal.
A man walks onto a plane, hands a flight attendant a note, and whispers 5 words that would change aviation history forever. Hours later, he jumps out of that plane into a freezing black sky with $200,000 strapped to his chest. And then he vanishes. No body, no footprints, no arrest, nothing. For 54 years, D.B. Cooper became America's greatest ghost story. The FBI chased down over 800 suspects. They combed through forests, rivers, and mountains. They followed every tip, every lead, every dead end. And in the end, they found absolutely nothing. In 2016, they officially gave up. But here's where it gets interesting. A retired pilot just discovered something hidden in a grandmother's closet in Utah. A parachute, one that matches FBI records from 1971. And the family who kept it hidden for over 5 decades. They've finally started talking. After 54 years of silence, the truth behind America's only unsolved hijacking is about to come out. And trust me, you're going to want to hear this. It was the night before Thanksgiving, 1971. Portland International Airport was buzzing with travelers rushing to get home for the holiday. Families reuniting, friends catching up, the usual holiday chaos. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was scheduled for a short 30-minute hop to Seattle. Nothing fancy, nothing out of the ordinary, just another routine flight that would be forgotten by morning. But somewhere between the ticket counter and seat 18C, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses was about to turn that routine flight into the most legendary hijacking in American history. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. Average-looking guy, mid-40s, black tie, white shirt, the kind of person you'd walk past without a second glance. He didn't stand out. He didn't draw attention. And that was exactly the point. This man had clearly thought through every single detail. The flight took off without incident. Passengers settled into their seats, probably thinking about the turkey dinners waiting for them at home. But about halfway through, Cooper flagged down a flight attendant and handed her a folded note. She smiled politely and slipped it into her pocket without reading it. Probably just another guy trying to pass her his phone number. It happened all the time on these flights. But then Cooper leaned in close and whispered something that made her blood run cold. He told her she better look at that note because he had a bomb. She opened it immediately, her hands probably trembling as she unfolded the paper. The note laid out his demands in clear, calm handwriting. He wanted $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting on the runway in Seattle. If he didn't get what he wanted, he'd blow the entire plane out of the sky. And just to prove he wasn't bluffing, Cooper popped open his briefcase just enough to show her what was inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery pack. It looked like dynamite rigged to explode. Whether it was real or not, nobody was willing to take that chance. Now, the flight attendant could have panicked. She could have screamed and caused chaos in the cabin. But she didn't. She kept her composure, nodded calmly, walked to the cockpit like she was doing her regular rounds, and told the pilot everything. The pilot radioed air traffic control with a hijacking code. Within minutes, the FBI was notified. This was now a federal case. When the plane landed in Seattle, Cooper let all 36 passengers go. They walked off that aircraft completely unaware that they'd just been part of what would become the most infamous hijacking in American history. The FBI delivered the money and the parachutes exactly as Cooper demanded. Everything was going according to his plan. And then Cooper gave his final instruction. He ordered the remaining crew to take off again, fly south toward Mexico, keep the altitude low at around 10,000 feet, the speed slow at less than 200 miles per hour, and most importantly, keep the rear staircase of the plane lowered. That last detail was crucial, and it showed just how much homework Cooper had done. The Boeing 727 had a unique feature that most passengers never knew about: a rear air stair that could be lowered mid-flight. It was a design quirk that would later be eliminated from all aircraft, specifically because of what happened that night. Cooper knew about this feature. He'd clearly studied the plane inside and out, somewhere over the dense, rain-soaked forests of Washington state. At around 8 p.m., D.B. Cooper grabbed the money, strapped on a parachute, walked to the back of the plane, and jumped into the pitch-black night. The temperature outside was below freezing. The winds were howling at nearly 200 miles per hour. Rain was whipping sideways through the darkness. And just like that, he was gone. The crew landed in Reno, Nevada, a few hours later. They checked the entire aircraft. Cooper was no longer on board. All that remained was a black clip-on tie with faint DNA traces sitting on one of the seats, a set of tie clips, and 2 of the 4 parachutes he'd requested. He'd taken the other 2 with him into the void. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in American history. Hundreds of FBI agents flooded the Pacific Northwest. State troopers, paratroopers, military helicopters, search and rescue teams with bloodhounds. They searched every inch of forest they could find. They scoured riverbanks and small towns. They dug through mud and leaves and debris, looking for any sign of the man who'd jumped. But they found nothing. Not a single footprint. Not a shred of fabric from his suit. Not a dollar bill from the ransom. Not even a broken twig they could trace back to him. It was like the man had melted into the trees. 9 years later, in 1980, an 8-year-old boy camping with his family along the Columbia River found something strange buried in the sand. 3 bundles of $20 bills, rotted and sun-damaged, but still bound in rubber bands. The FBI confirmed the serial numbers matched the ransom money. It was the first and only physical evidence Cooper left behind, but it raised more questions than it answered. Did he die in the fall and the money washed downstream? Or did he plant it there just to mess with investigators? And here's the thing that made this case even stranger. The media got his name wrong. The name on his boarding pass was Dan Cooper. But somewhere in the reporting, a journalist made a mistake. Dan became DB and DB Cooper stuck. That mistaken name became legendary. It appeared in movies, songs, books, and conspiracy theories for decades. For the next 45 years, the FBI investigated over 800 suspects. They chased down tips from psychics, amateur sleuths, and dying men claiming to be Cooper on their deathbeds. None of them matched, not a single one. The case went ice cold, and in 2016, the Bureau officially closed the investigation, calling it one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. But what they didn't know was that the man they'd been hunting for all those years had already made a fatal mistake. He did it again, just 5 months later, and this time he got caught. 5 months after D.B. Cooper vanished into that November sky, something eerie happened. Something that should have set off alarm bells at FBI headquarters. On April 7th, 1972, a man boarded United Airlines Flight 855 in Denver, Colorado. He was dressed in a business suit. He carried a briefcase. and he had that same calm, calculated demeanor that witnesses had described on Flight 305. His name was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. McCoy handed a note to the flight attendant. He told her he had a bomb. He demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. He ordered the crew to refuel the plane after landing and take off again, heading west. Every single detail mirrored the Cooper hijacking almost perfectly. Sound familiar? Because it should. McCoy was running the exact same playbook Cooper had used just 5 months earlier. Same type of aircraft, a Boeing 727. Same rear staircase escape route. Same calm note-passing technique. Same parachute demands. Same instructions about altitude and speed. It was almost surgical in its precision, like someone had studied the Cooper case frame by frame and decided to recreate it. After the ransom was delivered, McCoy ordered the pilots to fly over Utah. And then, just like Cooper, he walked to the back of the plane, opened the rear stairs, and jumped into the night. He disappeared into the darkness with $500,000 strapped to his body. But here's where McCoy made his mistakes, and they were costly ones. He left a handwritten note in the cockpit, the kind of evidence that any careful criminal would have taken with them. And he left his fingerprints all over a glass of water he'd used during the flight. Amateur mistakes that Cooper never made. Within days, the FBI matched those prints back to McCoy through military records. They tracked him down at his home in Provo, Utah, where he was just sitting with his family like nothing had happened. The money was found buried near his property. Now, here's what made this whole thing even more bizarre. Richard McCoy wasn't some career criminal. He wasn't a desperate man at the end of his rope. He was a decorated Vietnam War veteran, a helicopter pilot who'd flown combat missions and earned a Purple Heart for his service, a devout Mormon with a wife named Karen and 2 young children. He was even studying law at Brigham Young University at the time of his arrest. His neighbors described him as polite, quiet, deeply religious, and completely normal. So how does a man like that pull off one of the most brazen hijackings in American history? What pushes a war hero to strap on a parachute and jump out of a commercial airliner with a bag full of stolen cash? The FBI asked themselves the same question, and naturally, they started wondering if McCoy might be connected to the Cooper case. The similarities were just too perfect to ignore. Same plane, same escape method, same calm demeanor, same detailed understanding of aircraft operations. But here's the twist. The Bureau shut that theory down almost immediately. They claimed the 2 men couldn't possibly be the same person. Cooper was described by witnesses as being in his mid-40s with dark hair and olive skin. McCoy was only 29, fair-skinned, with lighter hair. The handwriting on the notes looked different. The physical descriptions didn't match up. Case closed. McCoy was labeled a copycat, a talented one, but nothing more than an imitator who got caught. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. But Richard McCoy wasn't done making headlines. 2 years into his sentence, he escaped from a Pennsylvania penitentiary using a fake gun he'd carved out of dental paste. He hid in a garbage truck with a group of other inmates and slipped away into the night like a ghost. His freedom lasted 3 months. FBI agents tracked him down to a hideout in Virginia. There was a shootout. McCoy opened fire, and he was killed on the spot in 1974. At the time, everyone assumed that was the end of the story. The copycat was dead. The original Cooper was still a ghost, floating somewhere in American folklore. Case closed forever. But what if the FBI got it wrong? What if those differences in appearance and handwriting weren't coincidences, but deliberate misdirection? What if McCoy wasn't the copycat at all? What if he was the original? That question would haunt investigators and amateur sleuths for decades, and it would take a retired pilot with an obsession for aviation mysteries to finally crack it open. For most people, the D.B. Cooper case was just a fascinating piece of American folklore, a mystery to debate at dinner parties and speculate about online, a story that got more legendary with every passing year. Some people even celebrated it. Cooper-themed festivals are held in the Pacific Northwest to this day. Treasure hunters still search the Columbia River area, hoping to find traces of the missing ransom. But for Dan Grider, it was something else entirely. It was an obsession. Grider is a retired commercial airline captain with over 24,000 flight hours under his belt. The man has spent more time in the sky than most people spend awake in a decade. He runs a YouTube channel where he dives deep into aviation mysteries, and for nearly 20 years, he'd been quietly researching the Cooper case. Long after the FBI packed up their files and moved on, Grider kept digging. He studied flight logs and terrain maps, wind speed calculations and weather patterns from November 1971. He recreated jump scenarios using the same parameters Cooper would have faced that night. He dissected parachute models and analyzed every detail of Cooper's escape route with the kind of precision only a professional pilot would have. And he followed every lead, no matter how small or how cold. In 2023, one of those leads took him to a storage unit in Utah. The unit had once belonged to a woman with direct ties to the McCoy family. Richard McCoy's mother, to be specific. She had passed away, and the contents of her storage unit were being sorted through. What Grider found inside changed everything. Buried beneath boxes of old books, Christmas decorations, and family memorabilia was a parachute, canvas, weathered, carefully wrapped and tucked away like someone wanted to make sure it stayed hidden. But this wasn't just any parachute. It was military-grade, old, and it had very specific modifications to the harness clips and cord loops. The kind of modifications that matched detailed descriptions in FBI files from 1971. The kind of modifications that only someone with deep expertise in parachuting would know how to make. Grider recognized it immediately. He'd spent years studying the technical specifications of the parachute Cooper supposedly used, the unusual stitching patterns, the reinforced straps, the hand-adjusted hooks, and this one matched almost perfectly. But here's what made this discovery even more significant. The parachute wasn't just sitting out in the open collecting dust. It had been carefully preserved and stored for over 50 years, hidden away like someone knew exactly what it was and wanted to make sure no one ever found it. A grandmother with no connection to skydiving or aviation had kept this military parachute in her closet for half a century. Why would anyone do that unless it meant something? Alongside the parachute, Grider found something else. McCoy's personal jump logbook, handwritten entries documenting his practice jumps with meticulous detail. The entries showed 8 careful practice jumps leading up to November 1971. And then the entries stopped, completely. No explanation, no notes. They didn't resume again until just before the April 1972 hijacking. Think about that for a second. A trained military paratrooper with dozens of logged jumps suddenly stops all parachuting activity right before the most infamous skyjacking in American history, and then starts again right before his own hijacking 5 months later. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. That's someone practicing for something specific and then going dark until the mission was complete. Grider knew he was onto something massive, but finding the parachute was only half the battle. Physical evidence could only take him so far. He needed confirmation from the people who would know the truth better than anyone. He needed the family to talk. For years, Dan Grider tried to contact McCoy's children. He sent emails, handwritten letters, messages through mutual contacts and distant relatives. He reached out through every channel he could think of, hoping someone would respond. The response was always the same: silence. Not anger, not denial, not even a polite refusal. Just nothing. Complete radio silence for years. At first, Grider thought they were just being protective of their father's memory. Maybe they didn't want his name dragged through the mud again after all these years. Maybe they were tired of journalists and true crime enthusiasts harassing them with questions. That would make sense. But the more he dug into the family's history, the more he realized this wasn't just about protection. This was about something much heavier, something the family had been carrying for their entire lives. McCoy's children, Shantae and Rick McCoy III, had grown up under a dark shadow. Their father had been arrested for hijacking, convicted and sentenced to 45 years, escaped from federal prison, and then killed in a shootout with the FBI, all before they were even teenagers. That alone would be enough to traumatize any family for generations. But there was something else, something they'd been ordered to keep secret since childhood. According to sources close to the family, Karen McCoy, Richard's wife, had allegedly helped plan the logistics for both hijackings. Not just the second one that got him caught, both of them. She secured supplies. She helped coordinate the escape routes. She was his partner in everything. And after her husband was killed in that Virginia shootout, she spent the rest of her life making absolutely sure no one ever found out the full truth. The children were raised under strict orders. Never talk about what your father did. Never answer questions from reporters or investigators. Never let anyone into the family's business. It was the only way to protect their mother, the only way to keep her out of prison. One wrong word, and everything would come crashing down. And so, they stayed silent. For decades, even as the D.B. Cooper legend grew, even as documentaries were made and books were written, they watched the world speculate about their father's possible connection to the case and said absolutely nothing. But then Karen McCoy passed away, and shortly after, Richard's mother, the grandmother who had kept that parachute hidden in her closet for 50 years, also passed. With both women gone, there was no one left to protect, no reason to keep the secret buried any longer. That's when the wall finally cracked. Grider reached out one more time after learning about the deaths, and this time, something was different. The children agreed to meet. They agreed to talk. What they told him was staggering. Rick McCoy III admitted that the family had always suspected the truth. From the time they were children, there were things in the house that no one was allowed to touch, questions that no one was allowed to ask, boxes in closets that had been sealed shut for as long as they could remember. Their mother would shut down any conversation that got too close to the subject. Rick described growing up with the weight of an unspoken truth pressing down on him every day, a secret so heavy it shaped every relationship he had, every decision he made, like living in a prison without walls, knowing you're carrying knowledge that could change history, but being terrified of what would happen if you ever let it out. And now, with their mother and grandmother both gone, they were finally ready to let it go. Rick confirmed what Grider had suspected all along. His father was D.B. Cooper. The family had always known deep down. They just couldn't say it out loud while their mother was alive. The children turned over everything they had been guarding for decades: handwritten notes in their father's handwriting, parachute equipment that had been stored away, personal notebooks documenting flights and jumps, even biological samples that could potentially be used for DNA analysis. Items that had been locked away and protected for over 50 years were finally handed over to investigators. This wasn't just a cold case breakthrough anymore. This was a family unburdening itself after half a century of silence. When Dan Grider released his findings on YouTube, the videos exploded. Millions of views within days, trending across every platform. News outlets from around the world picked up the story. Everyone wanted to know if America's greatest aviation mystery had finally been solved. And the FBI noticed. Within days of Grider posting his videos, the Bureau reached out to him directly. They didn't wait for him to contact them. They came to him, and according to Grider, they told him they knew exactly what they were looking for. The FBI agreed to examine the parachute under Grider's conditions. They promised to return everything within 7 days if it didn't match their criteria. Grider handed over the parachute, the logbook, everything. That was over a year ago. Nothing has been returned. The evidence is now sitting at the FBI's forensic lab in Quantico, Virginia. And according to multiple reports, DNA testing is underway. Here's why that matters. Remember that clip-on tie Cooper left behind on the plane? It had faint traces of DNA on it, partial, degraded, but still potentially usable with modern technology. For 50 years, the FBI had nothing to compare it to. But now, with biological samples from McCoy's children, they finally have a chance to make a match. If the DNA lines up, the case is solved. America's only unsolved hijacking would finally have an answer. The FBI hasn't confirmed anything publicly, but the fact that they've held onto the evidence for over a year speaks volumes. Something significant is happening behind closed doors at Quantico. And here's what makes this moment so significant. For 54 years, D.B. Cooper was a ghost, a folk hero who outsmarted the FBI and vanished with a bag full of cash. Songs were written about him, movies were made. He represented something romantic in the American imagination. The idea that one man could beat the system and disappear forever. But if McCoy is confirmed as Cooper, that legend changes. The mysterious anti-hero becomes a decorated war veteran, a family man, a devout Mormon, and a man who risked everything twice for reasons we may never understand. The romantic outlaw narrative crumbles, and in its place, we get something more human, more tragic, and ultimately more real.